Chapter 30. The ride to the cons was quiet, except for the directions Alex gave him. They took a string of rough dirt roads between the two ranches. He probably could have found his own way, but he would have gone out on the highway, and Alex said this was quicker. "You go in and see Rebecca. I'll talk to Nick, then find JV. All right?" Matt asked as he parked his truck in front of the main house. "Sure." She opened her door and used the running board to climb down rather than slide out of the seat like she normally would. He knew it was because the jolt of landing would have hurt. He'd been watching her since she'd insisted on getting out of bed. From what he could tell, she was healing well. Yes, she was hurting some, but he knew from having absorbed her pain for her for several days that it was a drop in the bucket compared to what it had been when he'd arrived. He'd not been thrilled when she'd told him no more, but he'd accepted it. Alex was a strong, independent woman, and he knew if he tried to take away her freedom, or even curtail it, then it would make things harder between them. He really didn't want to do that. Climbing out, he didn't bother to lock the truck as he joined her on the path to the porch. Steve answered their knock on the front door. He looked tired and a little worn. "Hey, I was hoping I could see Rebecca," Alex said, looking past him for anyone else in the room, but she didn't try to get past him. When he didn't answer right away, she looked back at him and waited. "She's in bed." "I kinda assumed that's what bed rest meant." She tilted her head to one side and propped one hand on her hip, grinning at him to counter the snarky words. "I'm here to cheer her up." He looked at her a couple of minutes, then stepped aside. "Don't let her get up except to use the bathroom, and try to keep her calm." "No problem," she called back as she headed down the hall toward where Matt knew the con's bedroom was. The two watched until she was out of sight. Matt turned to his brother-in-law and looked at him for a couple of seconds. "Been a rough few days?" Matt asked. "Stressful. You look half dead." "I feel it too. Between worrying about her." He tilted his head toward the bedroom where Alex had disappeared. "And taking care of Jade, I'm about done in." "What's up with JV?" His friend's nickname for his sister didn't even register much anymore. He'd called her that since she was a child. Steve shook his head. "She's overexerting herself. She put everything she had into stopping the Karen's labor. I can't really fault her for it, but she slept for a day and a half afterward. And that was with me pushing as much energy at her as I could." Matt scowled. He had always been a bit protective of his sister. He thought it was probably because of the age gap, but he hated hearing about her wearing herself out like this. "Not good. Is there anything I can do?" "Not really." Steve shook his head while looking at the floor. "She's been worried that she couldn't do more for Alex too, but I put my foot down. It was one thing to do what she can safely do to help, it's another to endanger herself to do it." He went into the kitchen and poured himself a cup of coffee, pointing at Matt then the mugs, telling him without words to help himself. "You being with Alex has helped." She worried about not being able to help Alex heal faster, but knowing you were with her taking care of her, made her worry less. He went to the table and sat. "So how are things between you and Alex?" "Stalled." Matt poured himself a cup of coffee, then sat at the table across from his friend. "Not because we're not drawn to each other or don't get along, but because of her injury. I think it will work out between us, but we've got to take the steps to get there." He grinned. "But I've started my seduction. She's not completely healed, but I'd like JV to take a look at her, make sure she's healing okay." He waved one hand at Steve, stopping the other man before he could protest. "I don't want her to try to heal her, just make sure there are no issues in her recovery. I don't want to tax my sister more than necessary, but I'm worried and I'd like to make sure it's going all right. Especially with her insisting on getting out of bed and going out and about. He frowned in the direction of the bedroom where Alex had disappeared. Also, I need to talk to your Khan. I have a couple things I need to speak to him about. Nick's down at the barn. He's having a difficult time with all this. We thought it best to keep him busy. Some of the hands have tried to do that for us this morning. I'm not entirely sure what they came up with since he wanted me to stay here and make sure Rebecca and the baby are both okay. No problem. I'll walk down and talk to him. Is JV resting? At Steve's nod he continued. Then I'll wait until I get back to talk to her about Alex. I really would like her to look my girl over, but I don't want to push her past her limits either. Matt tipped his cup back and drained the last of the coffee. He pushed his chair back and stood. You said Nick's in the barn? Last I heard, though they may have moved on from there. Steve took a drink and looked out the window beside him. All that was outside the window was the stretch of woods between the Khan's cabin and Steve and JV's. I'll go check. You keep an eye on the girls. I'll check on the boss man. He'd hate you calling him that, but I'll let you check on him for me. Steve shook his head slowly. 2 people are more than I can keep track of on my own. I need more people on my main team. He stared into his cup for a while. Matt watched him for a few seconds then spoke. Alex is gonna be a while anyway. She's planning to cheer Rebecca up as much as she can. She's been calling every day, but you know how women are. He glanced toward the other room, so you can probably just hang out in here for a while. I'd say you could take a nap, but I know you won't. A half smile curved one half of Steve's mouth. No, as much as I should, I won't. I'll keep an eye out and rest later when I'm not working. I can't make you take good advice. Matt shook his head, stood and put his empty mug in the sink. I'm sure I'll see you before we leave. He clapped his friend on the shoulder on his way past him to the back door. Outside, he headed for the dirt road that led past the house to the ranch buildings a little ways through the trees. On the walk, he thought about what he was going to say to the clan leader. He was sure now that he didn't belong in Denver. He'd moved there years earlier, and he'd stayed because there was nowhere else he wanted to be, not because he wanted to be there. That was no longer true. He stopped when he reached the clearing where the barns and paddocks sat. He scanned the large pasture and found a group near one paddock on the far side of the barn. Hoping he'd find the Khan there, he headed in that direction. As he got close, he saw Nick standing against the fence, one leg propped up on a rail and his arms folded on top, as he watched Bobby on horseback in the paddock. There were several other men around, and Matt recognized some of them as clan members, others as human ranch hands. He walked up beside the clan leader and folded his arms on the top rail much like the other man. What's going on? Matt asked. He's trying to train the horse. This one's a little more stubborn than some of the others, but I was just watching for a few minutes, Nick said, still watching the man and horse in front of them. How's Alex? I take it she's well enough to leave the house? She insisted. Matt sighed. I didn't want to let her out, but she didn't give me much of a choice. At least she's being careful. She's visiting with your wife now. Matt shook his head, unsure how he'd gotten to the point where the girl was bossing him around, but here he was and he didn't want to change it either. She's something else. Nick turned and looked at him. You're caught, aren't you? He said with a slow grin. Matt lifted one corner of his mouth in a wry smile. Yep, that's why I came to talk to you. I've got a few things to do, so walk with me while you talk. Nick turned away from the fence and headed toward the barn. I assume this has to do with Alex? He asked once they were out of earshot of the human hands. It does, but she doesn't know what I'm doing. What do you mean she doesn't know? Nick led him into the barn and to a small room in the far corner. She knows I wanted to talk to you, but not what about. Nick's brows lifted. You didn't tell her you were looking for permission to move down here? The small room turned out to be an office, with a small desk and a pair of chairs, one on either side of the desk. Nick motioned for him to sit in front of the desk, then sat in the one behind it. We've talked about the possibility and that I wouldn't expect her to come to me should things work out between us, but she doesn't know that's why I'm here now. So tell me, what if things don't work out between you? If you've moved down here to be close to her, what will you do then? Matt looked down at his hands, folded together in his lap, then looked up and met the clan leader's gaze. I understand what you're getting at, but she's not the only reason I've decided this is where I want to be, which is why I didn't tell her why I wanted to talk to you. Even if things don't work out between us, my sister is still here. Steve is still here. My nieces and nephews, once they start arriving, will be here. There's nothing holding me in Denver. I want to be here with my friends and family. Nick watched him for several seconds. He seemed to be looking for something, but Matt had no idea what. All right. Get permission from your con to leave, and I'll happily accept you here. Will you be needing a job? No sir, that's not a problem. My clients shouldn't have a problem with my location change. It's not like I work out of an office anyway. That's too bad, we could use another enforcer we trust. And from past experience I'd trust you, should you pass the physical test. I'd pass, and I might be willing to help out on a part-time basis, but it's not something I'd want to do full-time. I don't have the temperament for it. Neither does your sister, but it's done a lot of good for her self-confidence. Plus, it's been nice having a woman on the team for those situations when a man involved would be awkward. Steve and I have agreed to let her stay on the team until she's ready to give it up though. Forcing her off would only set back the ground she's gained. Matt nodded slowly as he thought about it. He couldn't argue. JV was definitely more confident and assertive than she'd been for years. It was obvious it had been good for her. What if she gets pregnant? The very pregnant Karen popped into his head. He would like to see his sister like that. The image of Alex, her belly round with his child, flashed through his mind. He wasn't sure if the idea thrilled him or terrified him more. He tried not to let his thoughts show on his face. Obviously, we'll have to convince her to step down, at least temporarily when that happens, if she's not already done so on her own. Nick smiled. But we're not above using oblique methods to convince her either. Matt smiled and shook his head. They definitely knew his sister. Speaking of pregnancy, how is your mate? I know she's had some problems with preterm labor and is on bed rest, but how is she really? Nick leaned back in his chair and got a little more comfortable. She's tired. Ready for the baby, but also wants it to stay safe and protected where it is. The doctor told us the baby's healthy, but we need to do what we can to let it stay where it is for at least another 2 weeks, 4 would be better. Do you have names picked out? We do. We've got a boy name and a girl name, but we're keeping them to ourselves. I understand. Matt's heart ached. If you share before the baby arrives, people always have opinions. If you wait, they keep their mouths shut. Exactly. We've decided this is our baby, we'll be choosing the name, not the entire clan. I don't blame you. So, how do you think Alex is gonna take the news that you're planning on moving? Well, I have high hopes. Speaking of, do you know of anywhere available to rent? I'd prefer a month-to-month deal without a lease if I can get one. I might know of a couple. He tilted his head to one side. Why no lease? Because if I get my way, I won't be there for long. He couldn't keep the grin off his face. He had spent the last several days with Alex, and he felt like things were progressing well. If they continued to, he might be mated in another month or two. The idea made his heart skip a beat, and heat spread through his body. Nick chuckled and shook his head. I hope it works out for you. He stood. Why don't we go up to the house and check on our women? We probably should. Matt pushed himself out of the chair and followed the clan leader. Besides, if I don't make sure lunch is made, that stubborn wife of mine will try to get out of bed and make it herself, or JV will. Together they left the barn and headed for the road leading to the houses. I'm desperately trying to avoid that. Your sister's been pushing herself too hard the last few days. She's used more energy than is wise on my mate, not that I'm unhappy about that, except that it's compromising her. Then she insists on standing her watch as well. We've been short-handed with Alex down and sending Bobby over to help you out. That won't be necessary anymore. Keeping someone with us, that is. She's forbidden me from taking on her pain anymore, at least for this injury, so I don't need to stay quite so close to her. Sounds like we've all three got our hands full with headstrong women. We do, but admit it, you wouldn't change a thing about her even if you could. Nick grinned. No, I sure as hell wouldn't. Back in the house they found JV sitting at the kitchen table, blurry-eyed and looking 10 years older than when Matt had put her on the plane just over a week ago. She had a cup of coffee in one hand and took long drinks that would drain it in no time. You're not working this afternoon, so you might as well just keep your butt in the chair. Nick pointed one finger at her and spoke in a firm voice. I'm fine. Just let me wake up and I'll work my shift. No. You won't. Bobby's back, so you'll take the rest you need. He dropped one hand on her shoulder and kept it there. Across the room Steve growled. Nick looked up at him. Calm down, I'm just feeding her a little energy. She needs it. And to eat. I'll get lunch started in just a minute. I'm gonna go check on my mate first. He squeezed JV's shoulder, then let go, moving through the kitchen and disappearing down the hall that led to the bedroom. Matt went to the fridge and looked inside. Any idea what he planned to cook? Tacos, I think. Steve said. Why? So I can get it started. Matt pulled the large package of ground beef from the icebox and set it on the island behind him. Then went in search of a skillet. That cabinet, JV pointed, after he'd opened and closed a couple others. He pulled a large skillet out and put it on the stove. After dumping in the meat and turning on the burner, he found a spatula and started breaking it up. It was about half cooked by the time Nick made it back. You didn't have to do this, man. But thanks. He clapped one hand on Matt's back, then went to the fridge to get out some of the other things they'd need. I figured if I'm gonna be part of the clan, I might as well start acting like it. Wait, part of the clan? JV picked up her head. What do you mean, part of the clan? I've gotten your Khan's permission to move down here. I haven't talked to mine yet, so it's not a done deal, but there's no reason he should deny my request. I didn't know things were going that well with Alex, Steve said from where he sat at the bar, watching Matt cook. It's going well, but she's not my only reason. Don't get me wrong, I hope things between us continue to go as well as it has. It's promising, but I'm not counting on it until it happens. Well, if she's not your only reason, why else would you move down here? She turned in her chair until she could look him in the face. He stopped and looked at her for several seconds. Why do you think? I don't know. If I knew, I wouldn't be asking. She's tired, man, give her a break. Steve said. Her brain's not working like it should. With a sigh, Matt went back to stirring the meat. So I can be closer to the two of you, and hopefully soon, maybe the three of you or the four of you. 3 or 4? She looked confused. He means when we start having kids, Jade. Steve moved to sit beside her, took one of her hands in his, and squeezed. She looked at him, blinked slowly and frowned. You're trying to confuse me. No, I'm not. You're just easily confused today. You need more rest. I was going to ask you to look at Alex and make sure she's healing okay, but it's obvious you're not up to it right now. Matt said. No. I'll look at her. I've been working with Dr. Owens. He's been teaching me more about wounds, wound care and anatomy, so I can heal better. Matt gave her a long look. Look. Eyes only. No healing, no talent. He kept his voice firm. I mean it. Yes, Mom. She drained her cup and stood. She's in the bedroom with Rebecca? She is, Nick said from the island where he stood chopping onions. JV headed in that direction and slowly made her way to the bedroom. Once she was out of sight, Matt turned to Steve. She looks like shit, man, we gotta do something. I already did. Nick said. Without a word, both men turned and looked at him, waiting for more. Bobby will take her shift this afternoon, and until she's back to 100%. He'll take over after lunch. He stopped cutting and looked at Steve. You're gonna take her back to bed. And you're gonna let her rest, no funny business. I'll let you tell her no funny business. Steve laughed. Telling her no is like a challenge. La, Matt said, turning to look at his best friend and brother-in-law. TMI, dude. I swear you forget she's my sister. I don't want details here. Steve laughed. Trust me, I never forget she's your sister, and I wasn't going to go into detail. I'm a gentleman. He tugged at the front of his shirt and straightened his shoulders. Yeah, such a gentleman, that I know exactly how far Shirley Littner was willing to go in high school. Matt shot back. Steve turned pink. I've grown up since then. You damn well better have. JV's better than that. Don't I know it? Why do you think I ran all those years ago? I wasn't good enough, and she wasn't ready. Now I'm better, and she's prepared to deal with my crap. Again, I don't want to hear about your crap. Matt pointed the spatula he'd been using on the hamburger at Steve. Cut it, you two, they're headed in here. Nick cut into their banter. He went to the sink and rinsed off his knife, then went back to the cutting board. The girls came into the room, Alex happy and almost bouncing, except Matt could tell she was still favoring her injured side. JV walked more slowly, her exhaustion taking a toll. Alex came up behind Matt, wrapped her arms around his waist and laid her face against his back. The heat of her skin through his shirt touched something in him. See, I told you I'm healing fine, she said. Matt looked at JV, one brow lifted, waiting for confirmation. She's doing well, another day or so, and she should be able to do whatever she wants. She refilled her mug and sat back down at the table. Rebecca is good too. She said she was going to rest until you brought her food. She looked at the clan leader for the last part. We'll make sure you all three eat well, so no worries there. His eyes flicked from the tomatoes in front of him to her, then to Alex. Alex, have a seat. We'll get things done faster. All right. She pulled away from Matt's back and went to sit across from Rebecca. How would you feel if Matt decided to move down here, Alex? Nick asked as he cut. Matt knew he was testing the water for him, but he wasn't worried about her reaction. I'd be thrilled, she said, her eyes darting to Matt. You gonna come live with me? Matt coughed. Well, that wasn't my plan, at least not yet. Can we talk about this later, please? He sent along the mental path they'd established over the last few days. Her sigh was loud in his mind. If you insist. How soon are you planning on moving? She asked out loud. I'm not sure yet, I haven't talked to my con yet. I don't know if he'll allow me to leave Denver. Is there some reason he wouldn't? JV asked, a frown creasing her brow. No, at least not that I know of, but I'll have to ask to know for sure. There was some chat, and getting caught up on what had happened since Alex had gotten hurt, while the guys got dinner.